Picture this. You're in a conversation and the other person locks eyes with you. Instantly, your brain feels like it's being plugged into an overloaded circuit. Their emotions are flooding in. Anxiety, expectation, judgment, curiosity, all at once. You break eye contact not because you're rude or disinterested, but because maintaining it feels like trying to drink from a fire hose. And then comes the guilt. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just look at people like everyone else? Here's what nobody tells you. Avoiding eye contact isn't a social deficiency. It's often a sign that your brain is doing too much, not too little. While most people experience a conversation as a simple exchange of words, you're experiencing a full sensory download. Micro-expressions, tonal shifts, unspoken emotions, all hitting your nervous system simultaneously. Psychologists call this sensory processing sensitivity, and it affects roughly 20% of the population. That's 1 in 5 people walking around with what I call an 8K IMAX brain in a standard definition world. The eyes aren't just windows to the soul. They're bandwidth-heavy data transmitters. For people with heightened mirror neuron activity, direct eye contact doesn't just feel intense. It is neurologically intense. Your brain is literally working overtime to process facial micro-movements, pupil dilation, blink rates, and emotional undertones that most people filter out automatically. It's not that you can't handle connection. It's that your system is so finely tuned to emotional data that direct eye contact becomes cognitively expensive. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't a bug in your programming. It's a feature. Throughout human history, the people who could read subtle emotional cues, who noticed when someone's smile didn't reach their eyes, or when a tone shift signaled danger, were the ones who survived. You're not broken. You're the descendant of the hypervigilant, the pattern recognizers, the emotional translators. And in this video, we're going to break down exactly why your brain operates this way, what it says about your intelligence and empathy, and how to stop seeing it as a weakness. Let's start with the most common reason people avoid eye contact, and it has nothing to do with shyness. It's about cognitive load. When you look someone directly in the eyes, your brain doesn't just see 2 eyeballs staring back. It sees a universe of information, the slight tension in their eyelids, the micro-movement of their pupils, the barely there furrow in their brow, the way their gaze shifts for a microsecond before refocusing. Most brains have a built-in spam filter that deletes about 90% of this data. Yours doesn't. Neuroscientists have discovered that people with heightened sensory processing sensitivity have more active mirror neuron systems. Mirror neurons are the brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform it. They're the reason you flinch when someone else gets hurt, or why you feel awkward when watching a cringy movie scene. For you, these neurons are working in overdrive during eye contact. You're not just seeing the other person's emotional state, you're involuntarily experiencing it. Their stress becomes your stress. Their discomfort becomes your discomfort. It's like emotional osmosis, and it's exhausting. Here's the kicker. This isn't happening because you're too sensitive. It's happening because your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function and decision-making, is simultaneously trying to manage the conversation, monitor your own social performance, interpret incoming emotional data, and regulate your response to all of it. That's 4 jobs at once. Most people are doing maybe 2. No wonder you need to look away to think clearly. Think of it like this. Eye contact for you is like trying to have a deep philosophical conversation while someone plays a documentary about human emotion 2 inches from your face at full volume. The content is meaningful, but the delivery system is overwhelming. So you look away, not to disconnect, but to actually process what's happening. You're not checking out, you're downloading. And the irony? The very act of looking away often allows you to be more present in the conversation, not less, because you've freed up the mental bandwidth to actually listen instead of just surviving the sensory assault. Now let's talk about the second type of eye contact avoider, and this one's going to hit different. If you've ever described yourself as someone who feels too much, This is your section. There's a specific kind of person who avoids eye contact, not because they can't read emotions, but because they read them too well. Psychologists studying post-traumatic growth have found something fascinating. People who survived childhood adversity, especially emotional neglect, parentification, or unstable home environments, often develop what researchers call aggressive empathy. Here's what that means in practice. You walk into a room and immediately sense that someone's fake smiling. You hear a voice say, "I'm fine," and detect 17 layers of "I'm absolutely not fine" underneath it. You notice when someone's laugh is half a second too late, when their posture shifts defensively, when their tone drops just slightly before they change the subject. This isn't a superpower you asked for. It's a survival adaptation. When you grow up in an environment where reading emotional weather patterns meant the difference between safety and chaos, your brain becomes a full-time emotional meteorologist. Dr. Lisa M. Hooper's research on parentified children shows that kids who had to manage their parents' emotions develop exceptional emotional intelligence as a defense mechanism. They become hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant, hyper-responsive. And here's the brutal part. That skill doesn't turn off in adulthood. So when you make eye contact with someone, you're not just having a conversation. You're running a background program that's analyzing their emotional state, cross-referencing it with past patterns, predicting their needs, and preparing your response to whatever emotional crisis might be brewing. All of this happens in seconds. All of it happens automatically, and all of it is draining. This is why you might find it easier to connect with animals than people. Dogs don't have hidden agendas. Cats don't fake enthusiasm. There's no subtext to decode, no emotional landmines to navigate. It's just straightforward, honest interaction. What you're really craving isn't less connection, it's connection without the performance, without the emotional obstacle course, without having to be both participant and referee in every single social exchange. But here's the shadow side nobody talks about. This kind of hyperempathy can turn you into an emotional sponge. You absorb other people's moods, their stress, their unspoken resentments. Eye contact becomes the gateway drug for emotional enmeshment. You look into someone's eyes, and suddenly you're carrying their anxiety like it's your own. You're not avoiding eye contact because you're cold or detached. You're avoiding it because you've learned the hard way that your boundaries are porous, and direct eye contact is the fastest way to lose yourself in someone else's emotional weather. Here's the third type, and this one's going to make you question everything you've been told about proper social behavior. Some people avoid eye contact not because they're overwhelmed or hyper-empathetic, but because they've consciously or unconsciously rejected the entire theater of social performance. If you've ever felt like maintaining eye contact is less about genuine connection and more about playing a character in someone else's script, you're experiencing what psychologists call existential authenticity resistance. Let me break this down. From childhood, we're taught that eye contact equals respect, engagement, honesty, confidence. We're told that good communicators hold eye contact for precisely the right amount of time. Not too little, or you seem shifty. Not too much, or you seem aggressive. It's social choreography, and for some people, it feels less like connection and more like emotional cosplay. You're not being you in that moment. You're being the performance of you that society has deemed acceptable. Here's what's happening in your brain. Your anterior cingulate cortex, the part responsible for detecting conflicts between your authentic self and your performed self, is firing alarm signals. Every time you force yourself to maintain appropriate eye contact when it doesn't feel natural, you're creating what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And here's the thing. Your brain hates dissonance. It's metabolically expensive, it creates cortisol, it drains your social battery faster than almost anything else. Think about the people you feel most comfortable with. Chances are, they're the ones where eye contact feels optional, not mandatory. You can sit in comfortable silence, look at the same sunset, work on separate projects in the same room, have deep conversations while doing dishes. The connection isn't in the eye contact, It's in the mutual understanding that you don't need to perform for each other. Richard Tedeschi's research on post-traumatic growth shows that people who've survived significant stress often develop what he calls deeper priorities. They stop caring about the superficial markers of connection and start craving the real thing. This is why you might hate small talk but love deep conversations, why you'd rather text than call, or why you prefer one-on-one interactions over group settings. It's not that you're antisocial, it's that you're selectively social. You're not interested in the performance of connection. You're interested in actual connection. And forced eye contact to you feels like being asked to smile on command. You can do it, technically, but it doesn't mean anything, and worse, it makes you feel like a fraud. The rebellion isn't against other people. It's against the expectation that you have to mask your authentic self to be considered normal. Every time you break eye contact to think, to process, to simply be without performing, you're making a quiet statement. I refuse to smooth myself down to make others comfortable. And that's not antisocial. That's integrity. Now we're getting into the deepest layer, and this one might sting a little. The fourth type of eye contact avoider isn't looking away because they're processing emotions or rejecting performance. They're looking away because their nervous system has been trained to prioritize survival over connection. If you grew up in an environment where you had to constantly scan for danger, read the room for threats, or monitor adults for signs of incoming chaos, your brain developed a very specific adaptation: environmental hypervigilance. Here's what's happening neurologically. When you experience chronic stress during developmental years, what Harvard researchers call toxic stress, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes hypersensitive. It's like a smoke detector that's been set to maximum sensitivity. A normal conversation for most people registers as neutral. For you, it registers as a potential threat that needs to be monitored, managed, and survived. And here's the brutal efficiency of trauma. Your brain learns that monitoring the environment is more important than maintaining eye contact with any single person. Think about it. If you grew up never knowing when a door slam meant anger, when a tone shift signaled danger, when silence meant someone was upset versus just tired, your survival depended on reading the entire room, not just the person in front of you. Eye contact requires you to narrow your focus to one face, one set of emotions, one data stream. But your nervous system is screaming, what if the real threat is behind you? What if someone walks in? What if you miss the warning signs? This is why you might find yourself constantly checking exits, monitoring who's entering a room, tracking movement in your peripheral vision, or feeling uncomfortable with your back to a door. Your eyes aren't avoiding contact because you're rude. They're doing perimeter sweeps because that's what kept you safe. Neuroscientist Dr. Stephen Porges calls this neuroception, your nervous system's subconscious detection of safety versus danger. And for people with a history of unpredictability or threat, eye contact represents tunnel vision. It represents vulnerability. It represents dropping your guard. Here's the shadow side that nobody talks about. This hypervigilance made you exceptional at reading situations. You can walk into a room and immediately sense the tension. You notice when someone's energy shifts before they say a word. You're the person who just knew something was wrong before anyone else did. That's not anxiety. That's pattern recognition developed through necessity. You became a human threat assessment system, and that system doesn't turn off just because you're now in a safe environment. Your nervous system remembers what your conscious mind wants to forget. The heartbreaking part? This adaptation that once protected you now isolates you. People interpret your environmental scanning as disinterest. They read your need for spatial awareness as social anxiety. They don't see a nervous system doing its job. They see someone who won't look them in the eye, and you're left carrying both the weight of your past and the judgment of your present, wondering why something as simple as eye contact feels like choosing between connection and safety. But here's what you need to understand. Your nervous system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was trained to do. The question isn't, how do I fix this? The question is, how do I honor what my body learned to survive while teaching it that it's allowed to rest now? So here's where we flip the entire script. Everything we've just discussed, the sensory overload, the authenticity resistance, the hypervigilance, society has taught you to see these as deficits, as things that need to be fixed, managed, or overcome. But what if I told you that avoiding eye contact isn't a bug in your social programming? What if it's actually a feature of high-level cognitive processing? Let's start with the evolutionary perspective. Our ancestors who survived weren't the ones who maintained constant eye contact during conversations. They were the ones who could process multiple streams of information simultaneously, track the herd, monitor the horizon, read body language, and still participate in group communication. The ability to disengage visual focus while maintaining cognitive presence was a survival advantage. You're not failing at modern social norms. You're excelling at ancient survival intelligence that modern society has decided to pathologize. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies from the University of Buffalo on unsociability, which is different from loneliness or social anxiety, show that people who need less social stimulation often have higher levels of what researchers call cognitive efficiency. Your brain isn't struggling to focus during eye contact. It's strategically reallocating resources. When you look away to think, you're not being rude, you're optimizing. You're reducing visual input so your prefrontal cortex can dedicate more processing power to understanding, analyzing, and formulating meaningful responses. Think about some of history's greatest minds. Einstein famously avoided eye contact during conversations, often staring at the ceiling or closing his eyes entirely while thinking. Tesla preferred solitude and claimed his best ideas came when he wasn't distracted by social interaction. These weren't socially deficient people. They were individuals whose brains operated at such high processing speeds that typical social conventions felt like speed bumps on a highway. They needed to minimize input to maximize output. Here's the reframe you've been waiting for. What if your awkwardness is actually a byproduct of operating at a higher emotional and cognitive resolution than the people around you? While others are watching the conversation in standard definition, you're experiencing it in 8K. That requires more processing power, more bandwidth, more mental energy. Of course you need to look away. You're running a more sophisticated operating system and it needs more resources to function. The hyper-empathy, that's not emotional weakness. That's elite-level emotional intelligence. You're not too sensitive, you're calibrated to detect signals that most people completely miss. In professional settings, this makes you exceptional at negotiation, counseling, leadership, creative work, and any field that requires reading between the lines. You're not failing at basic human interaction. You're overqualified for it. The authenticity resistance, that's not social dysfunction. That's integrity. You're refusing to participate in performative connection that feels hollow. You're holding out for real, substantive, meaningful interaction. That's not antisocial. That's having standards. In a world drowning in superficiality, your insistence on depth isn't a bug. It's a compass pointing toward what actually matters. And the hypervigilance? That's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition. Your nervous system learned to read complex environments and make split-second assessments about safety. That skill translates into professional settings as strategic thinking, risk assessment, and the ability to sense problems before they become crises. You're not damaged, you're differently calibrated. Now let's talk about what to actually do with all this information. Because understanding why you avoid eye contact is one thing, living in a world that still judges you for it is another. The goal here isn't to fix yourself or force eye contact until it feels natural. The goal is what I call strategic visibility. Choosing when to engage fully and when to protect your bandwidth without guilt. First, let's establish something critical. You don't owe anyone unlimited access to your emotional energy. This is where a lot of people who avoid eye contact get trapped. They feel guilty for needing to look away, so they overcompensate by forcing themselves into exhausting social performances that leave them depleted for days. Stop doing that. Your need for boundaries isn't a character flaw. It's a biological requirement. Your nervous system has specific energy limits, and respecting those limits isn't selfish. Here's a framework that actually works. The concept of sanctuary versus stage. There are moments in your life where you need to be on stage, job interviews, important presentations, conversations that genuinely require full engagement. In those moments, you can consciously choose to make eye contact, knowing it's temporary and purposeful. But the rest of your life, that's your sanctuary. That's where you get to exist without performing, without forcing, without pretending that your brain works like everyone else's. The mistake most people make is trying to be on all the time. They treat every social interaction like it's a performance review, constantly monitoring whether they're making enough eye contact, whether they seem interested enough, whether they're being normal enough. That's not connection. That's exhausting theater, and it's training your brain to associate all social interaction with stress, which only reinforces the avoidance cycle. Instead, try this. Give yourself permission to be selectively present. If you're in a conversation that doesn't require your full emotional bandwidth, small talk with a coworker, a casual catch-up with an acquaintance, a transactional exchange with a service worker, you don't need to force eye contact. A genuine smile, engaged body language, and active listening are more than enough. Save your high-intensity emotional presence for the people and moments that actually deserve it. Here's another practical strategy. Redefine what connection means for you. Society has sold you this idea that eye contact equals intimacy, but that's not universally true. Some of the deepest conversations happen while doing dishes together, driving in a car, walking side by side, or sitting on a couch looking at the same sunset. These parallel activities create what psychologists call side-by-side intimacy, connection without the pressure of constant eye contact. If this feels more natural to you, that's not avoidance, that's preference. Honor it. And here's the big one. Stop apologizing for your needs. When you say things like, "Sorry, I'm bad at eye contact," or "Sorry, I'm just awkward," you're reinforcing the narrative that you're deficient. Try this instead. Don't explain. Don't apologize. Just exist. The right people, the people worth keeping in your life, won't need an explanation for why you look away while thinking. They'll recognize that your presence isn't measured by where your eyes are pointing. They'll value the depth of your attention over the performance of your gaze. Finally, understand that protecting your peace isn't the same as being cold or heartless. This is the fear that stops a lot of people from setting boundaries. They worry that if they're not constantly available, constantly accommodating, constantly performing connection, they'll be seen as distant or uncaring. But here's the truth. Burnout makes you actually unavailable. Depletion makes you actually distant. Protecting your energy so you can show up authentically for the people who matter. That's not coldness. That's sustainability. So let's bring this all together. If you've made it this far, you've probably recognized yourself in at least one, maybe all, of these categories. The sensory processor who experiences conversations in overwhelming detail, the hyper-empath who absorbs emotions like a sponge, the authenticity rebel who refuses to perform connection, the hypervigilant survivor whose nervous system prioritizes safety over intimacy. And here's what I need you to understand. None of these are disorders. They're adaptations. They're the result of a brain that's either naturally wired for depth or has been trained through experience to operate at a different frequency than the mainstream. The world will continue to tell you that eye contact is the gold standard of communication, that avoiding it means you're lying or anxious or socially incompetent. But you now know the truth. You're not avoiding connection. You're managing the overwhelming amount of data that comes with it. You're not being antisocial. You're being strategically social, conserving your energy for interactions that actually matter. You're not broken. You're just running a different operating system than most people, and that system requires different inputs and outputs to function optimally. Here's the shift I want you to make. Stop trying to become someone who's comfortable with constant eye contact. That might never happen, and that's okay. Instead, start recognizing the legitimate intelligence behind your behavior. When you look away to think, Acknowledge that you're optimizing cognitive processing. When you feel drained after social interaction, honor that your nervous system just worked overtime doing emotional labor that most people don't even register. When you prefer texting over calling or one-on-one over groups, celebrate that you know your own bandwidth requirements and respect them. The people who matter will understand. They'll recognize that your presence isn't measured in eye contact duration, but in the quality of your attention, the depth of your insights, and your willingness to show up authentically rather than perform a sanitized version of yourself. The people who judge you for looking away, they're not your people. Let them go. Your energy is too valuable to spend on convincing people to see past their own narrow definitions of normal. And if you're still carrying shame about this, if there's still a voice in your head saying you need to get better at eye contact, I want you to ask yourself this: better for whom? Better according to what standard? Who decided that the way your brain processes information is less valid than someone else's? The answer is arbitrary social conventions that were never designed with your neurology in mind. You don't need to conform to a system that was built without considering people like you. So here's your new narrative. You're not a failed extrovert. You're not a broken socializer. You're a pattern recognition machine in a world that rewards surface-level interaction. You're a depth seeker in an age of shallow connection. You're someone whose brain is doing more, not less, during every social interaction. And that deserves recognition, not pathologization. If you've ever felt like a silent observer in a world full of performers, drop a comment below. Tell me which type resonated most: the sensory processor, the hyper-empath, the authenticity rebel, or the hypervigilant survivor. Let's see how many of us are out here quietly refusing to play the game, protecting our peace, and choosing depth over performance. Because I guarantee you're not alone. There's an entire community of people who think eye contact is overrated, and we've been waiting for you to find us. And if this video helped you see your awkwardness as the sophisticated survival strategy it actually is, hit that like button. Not because I need the validation, but because YouTube's algorithm needs to know that content like this matters. Share it with someone who needs permission to stop performing and start existing. Because the world doesn't need more people forcing eye contact. It needs more people brave enough to be authentically, unapologetically themselves. You're not weird. You're just wired for a different kind of intelligence. And the world is finally starting to catch up.